All right, folks. So back now, we're going to be talking this time a little bit about supply. And just like we have a first law of demand, we have a first law of supply. So we've got some notation up here. P again stands for the price. The arrow pointing towards the ceiling means that the price is going up. Below that, we have OF. OF stands for other factors. And we've got a sideways arrow above other factors. What's that saying? That if the price goes up and the sideways arrow above other factors means we're holding all other factors constant, then according to the first law of supply, the quantity supply should go up. So remember, when we talked about the first law of demand, we said that if price goes up and we hold all other factors constant, the quantity demanded would go down, not with respect to supply. Producers, put your producer cap on. Producers like higher prices. So if they see higher prices, they're going to supply more. All right, so what are some of the assumptions that we're going to make when we talk about the supply side of the economy? Um, Firms, the producers, consider their opportunity cost. So think of it this way: if you were, we're going to stick with craft beer. If you were going into the craft beer business, you probably, need to invest a certain amount of money. In a previous life, I used to do business consulting, small business consulting. I've talked to a number of people who started craft breweries. Some people have started with as little as 25,000 and they said they wish they started with more. Some people started with 100,000 and said they also wish they had more. But at any rate, there's a certain amount of money that's going to be invested into this business. And most of the time, it's not really lying around in somebody's mattress. It's probably invested somewhere. So if you're a hard-headed investor and you're thinking about, let's say, going into the craft beer business, you're thinking about the money, the opportunity cost of the money that you're putting into your resources. There's something else that you could be doing with that money, investing in some other way to be making money. Or if you have to quit your job, let's say, to get into this business full time, then you're losing out on whatever it is you would have been making at your old job. So producers consider their opportunity cost. Another thing is there could be factors that would get in the way of this supply materializing. For instance, just to use an example, real example from the craft beer space, back in about 2000, I think it was 2006, 2007 or so, just as craft beers were starting to hit their stride, there was a shortage of hops. And a lot of that came about because people planted hops anticipating that there was going to be this big surge in craft beer. That didn't materialize. Then a lot of those people ripped their hops out of the ground because they weren't making any money. And right when this demand materialized, there was just a shortage of hops. So there are these brewers out there, a lot of them saying, wow, if I could just get a hold of hops at these prices, I'd produce so much more, but they couldn't. So that's what I mean by there could be something that would get in the way of this supply materializing. What we're looking at is a hypothetical supply curve versus an actual supply curve. Number three, quantity supplied depends on the price. There's a positive relationship between quantity supplied and price, meaning that when price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. When price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. Again, invoking the ceteris paribus. We're holding all other factors constant. So that is the first law of supply. That's going to guide us in our conversation on supply. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a supply curve and we're going to get the numbers for our supply curve from our supply schedule. So when we talked about a demand curve, we were looking at people in the market who were demanding different quantities of beer at different prices. Now imagine that we're producers. Imagine that our market for beer only has four producers: Latitude 33, Stone, Ballast Point, Green Flash. Imagine this is the entire market for the production of craft beer in some area. And producers like higher prices as opposed to lower prices. So imagine that a low price for a growler of beer might be, let's say, 13. Okay, so we're going to go up here to our supply schedule. We're going to look at how many growlers of beer would be supplied at a price of 13 according to our supply schedule. And we see that Latitude 33 will supply 1, Stone will supply 7, Ballast Point will supply 1, and Green Flash is maybe not going to supply any. So what is our quantity supplied if these are the only 4 suppliers in the market? What we're going to do at 13, we're going to add up 1 plus 7 plus 1 plus 0 and our quantity supplied for the entire market is going to be 9. Okay, what are we going to do with that information? The same thing we did for looking at the demand curve, but this time we're looking at the supply curve. So we're going to find a quantity of 9 on the quantity axis. Remember, the x-axis is always the quantity axis, and we're going to find 13 on the price axis. The vertical axis, the y-axis, is the price axis. Here's 13 on the price axis. Here's 9 on the quantity axis. They meet right over here, and this would be the first point for our supply curve. All right, so let's say that you're a producer, you're not too happy with the price of 13. That seems like a low price. And for whatever reason, the price in the market goes up to 14. How is that going to affect you? Well, you're going to be a lot happier at a price of 14. According to our supply schedule, latitude 33 will supply 3 growlers instead of 1. Stone will supply 14 instead of 7. Ballast Point will supply 4 instead of 1, and Green Flash will supply 5 instead of 0. So what do we do with that information? We add up 3 plus 14 plus 4 plus 5, and we get 26. So we're going to take 26, that's our quantity. We're going to locate that on the quantity axis. So 26 looks like it's right there. We're going to find 14, the price that corresponds to a quantity of 26 on the price axis. Remember, the y-axis, the vertical axis, is the price axis. And where 14 and 26 meet, we can put another point right there and get our supply curve going. And so then we've got different prices here from our supply schedule. For instance, at a price of 15, according to our supply schedule, it says that latitude 33 would supply 5 growlers, stone 27, ballast point 6, and green flash 15. So if we add up 5 plus 27 plus 6 plus 15, we get 53. And again, we would find 53 on the quantity axis and 15 on the price axis, and that's how we get our point right there on our supply curve. Does that make sense? So in this class, we're going to derive the supply curve from our supply schedule. All right, just like we had a first, just like we talked about movements along the demand curve occurring because of a price change in the demand curve, we have basically the same thing for the supply curve. If we get a movement along the supply curve, it's because the price of the good changed. So imagine initially the price was $13.50. That's a low price. Producers aren't too happy with the price of $13.50. Looks like they might be supplying 17 or 18 at a price of $13.50. Imagine that for whatever reason the price went from $13.15 up to $15. $15 is a much better price if you're a producer. How do you react? You supply more. So the way we show it is a movement along the supply curve. The price went up on this axis and the quantity supplied went up on the quantity axis. That's moving up in this direction. Or imagine we started out at a price of 15 and for whatever reason the price went from, let's say, 15.50 right here at this point, which is like 74, 75 or something like that on the quantity axis. And for whatever reason the price went from 15.50 down to 14.50. At producers like higher prices, not lower prices. So if the price is coming down, the quantity supplied is also going to come down. And it looks like at a price of $14.50, maybe the quantity supplied is something like 37 or 38 or something like that. Does that make sense? Okay. Things that will lead to shifts in the supply curve. So one possibility that would affect the quantity supplied would be input prices. We were talking about beer. What are some of the inputs that go into beer? Well, obviously you've got hops and malt and water. So if the price of hops were to go up and you've got a certain budget to buy hops, now you can't buy as much, so you would be producing less beer. On the other hand, if the price of hops went down and you've got a certain budget of money that you can use to buy hops, then you can buy more hops and therefore make more beer. Technology, more efficient use of resources. So imagine that you, or maybe you're a brewmaster, or maybe you are the brewmaster, you figure out a way of squeezing more beer out of the same amount of hops without watering it down, shall we say. Then you'd be able to produce more as a result of that. If, on the other hand, let's say there was a deterioration somehow in your technology, then you wouldn't be able to produce as much. Number of sellers. This is actually something that is affecting the craft beer market now here in San Diego. A lot of people are getting into the business. A lot of people who are in the business are wondering how much longer so many sellers can last in this market. There are a lot of people are talking about a shakeout. So if more people get into the business, we would expect that the supply of beer would increase. On the other hand, if the day that this shakeout arrives, when it arrives eventually, some people will leave the business. They're not making money anymore. And we would expect that as a result of that, the quantity supplied would also go down. Future price expectations. So put your producer cap on. We said that we as consumers like it. If we think the price is going to go up, what we would do is buy more now. If we thought the price was going to go down, we'd buy less now and wait for the price to go down. If you're a producer, you're also affected by the price, but in a different way. If you thought the price of the good you're producing were going to go up in the future, you would probably opt to sell less now so that you could sell more at a higher price. In other words, you might be tempted to hold back a little supply. On the other hand, if you thought as a producer that the price was going to go down, you might say to yourself, well, why don't I try to sell as much as I can right now before the price winds up going down because I'll probably get a higher price. All right, government policies. So let me introduce this to you by giving you a quote from Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said the government's attitude towards this is if it moves, tax it. If it moves really quickly, restrict it, and if it doesn't move at all, subsidize it. Now he was specifically talking about one industry. This is a point in time again where if I was in a face-to-face class, I would ask students what industry he was talking about. He was talking about the transportation industry, and there's a good amount of truth to that. Think about what moves in transportation, things like automobiles. Anything to do with a car is taxed, right? You buy a car, you pay sales tax. You buy gasoline to put in the car, you're paying gasoline tax. You buy parts for your car, there's taxes on the parts. You're taxed every single way you can think of when it comes to your car. All right, what about the sector of the transportation industry that moves really fast? That would be air travel, right? Well, the government used to regulate the airline business. The government used to tell, I'm not making this up, government used to tell the airlines which cities they could fly between. They would tell the airlines how much they could charge passengers. They would tell the airlines what type of planes they could fly between two different cities. And I'm not making this up, folks. They'd even tell the airlines what food they were going to serve the passengers on the plane. Okay, what about this sector of the economy, of the travel or transportation industry that moves really slow? So think about things like Amtrak or the bus. Those are highly subsidized. They're all basically all transit is basically government run. Why is that? Because there's not a whole lot of money in it. And the fares that people pay to get on a bus or when you take a trip on Amtrak don't cover all the costs of that transportation. It's subsidized by taxpayers. So let's all joking aside, let's consider what happens in a market. Let's say when the government decides that they want to either subsidize something, tax something, or restrict something. So if the government were to subsidize producers of this, in other words, let's say we're back on craft beer now, and the government were going to pay producers of beer $1 a growler for each growler that they make. How would that affect producers? Well, if you're going to get $1 extra from the government, then you make more craft beer, right? Okay, let's say the government were to tax this activity. So let's say the government were saying, well, you guys in the craft beer business, you're not paying your taxes. Now we're going to tax it. Or maybe a better example would be the marijuana business, right? What is one of the reasons that the government is now um, legalizing marijuana? Part of it has to do with taxes, right? May as well collect a little bit of money. So if you're a producer and you haven't been paying taxes before, and now all of a sudden you're forced to pay taxes, we would expect that would reduce the quantity that you'd want to supply. All right, restrictions. What if the government says that you cannot produce this product? What if there's an outright prohibition, not a restriction? They're not telling you can only produce so much, you can't produce it at all. What is going to happen to the quantity supplied of this product? If you said it'll go into some kind of an underground market, you're right. Maybe people who pass laws think that passing a law will eliminate that activity. Economists, on the other hand, would say, okay, well, it might eliminate that activity in a legal market, but it'll probably create an underground market where that would occur. Does that make sense? And we can all think of instances where this has happened. Back in the 30s, it was with prohibition against alcohol. There's recreational drugs that are absolutely illegal. I'm not talking about marijuana, but other drugs. Yet, I'm sure some of you know somebody who might be able to get a hold of some of those if that were the case, if that was needed. And then finally, in agriculture, weather is something that we have to take into consideration. The farmer doesn't control the weather that he grows his crops in. So if he's got good weather, he'll probably grow a lot more. If he's got bad weather, whatever that weather happens to be, then he and his fellow farmers will probably grow a lot less. All right, so these are all determinants of supply. Let's take a look at how they will affect the supply curve. So if we have a decrease in the cost of an input, so again, we're on craft beer, imagine that the cost or the price of hops goes down. We can now buy more hops. If we can buy more hops, we can make more beer, so the supply of beer will increase. We show that as a rightward shift in the supply of hops, in the supply of beer, excuse me. If we have an improvement in technology, we figure out a way of making more beer with the same amount of hops, we would show that as a rightward shift in the supply curve. More people come into the industry, we'd show that as a rightward shift in the supply curve. If we expect the future price to decline, what would we do today? We'd want to supply more. What does that look like in our market model? That looks like a supply curve shifting to the right. If the government were to subsidize us, again, I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm not saying the government is going to pay people to make craft beer, but let's just say they did. I don't know why they do that, but they do a lot of crazy things, right? Then we would expect to see a rightward shift in the supply curve. And if we got good weather in agriculture, then that could lead to more crops being produced, not because the farmer's working harder or anything like that. The weather just is cooperating and allowing him to produce more. All right, what about things that would lead to a leftward shift in the supply curve? An increase in the price or cost of an input. I think I told you my hop story. When the price of hops went up, people could not make as much beer. So if all of a sudden it really went up, then the supply curve would shift to the left. A deterioration in technology. Maybe something happens at your craft brewery and your equipment is destroyed somehow, maybe in a fire. So then you'd be taking a certain amount of supply off the market. The supply, we'd show that as the supply curve shifting to the left. Decrease in the number of sellers. If people all of a sudden leave the industry, then the supply curve would shift to the left. If you expect the price to drop in the future, what would you do today? You might hold back supply. You've got beer to sell, but you think the price is going to go up in the future and you want to sell it at a higher price, so you would restrict your supply today. If the government were to tax or restrict it, it would lead to a leftward shift in the supply curve. Even if it was an outright prohibition, we're not saying that this activity is completely going to go away. It's just maybe going to go underground. And then if we have unfavorable weather in agriculture, that would lead to a leftward shift in supply. So just like we have we want to make sure that you're able to distinguish between an increase in quantity supplied and an increase in supply. We'll go over that, and a decrease in quantity supplied versus a decrease in supply. So an increase in quantity supplied occurs because the goods own price increases. So imagine we start off over here at P1. At P1, Q1 is the quantity. Imagine that for whatever reason the price goes from P1 to P2. P2 is a higher price than P1. Suppliers like higher prices. So they're going to be induced to supply more. How do we show that? We show that as an upward movement along the supply curve. What does an increase in supply look like? An increase in supply occurs not because the goods price changes, but because of one of those determinants of supply. So it could be like an increase in the number of sellers. It could be a decrease in an input price. It could be favorable weather in agriculture. The price of the good is staying the same, but the entire supply curve is shifting to the right. A decrease in quantity supplied occurs because the goods price goes down. So imagine we start off over here at P1 and the price goes from P1 to a lower price, which we'll call P2. Well, at P1, Q1 is the quantity. At P2, Q2 is the quantity. So the price is going down. Producers don't like lower prices, so they're going to supply less. We show that as a movement down the supply curve to a lower quantity. All right, what does a decrease in supply look like? No change in the goods price. One of those determinants of supply is coming into play. So maybe it's a deterioration in technology. Maybe it's sellers leaving the market. Maybe it's something like an increase in input prices. The entire supply curve shifts to the left despite the fact that the price has not changed. All right, finally we can get to equilibrium. So what is the idea behind equilibrium? Equilibrium is where the supply curve and the demand curve intersect. Where they intersect, we have an equilibrium price, which we call P equilibrium, and an equilibrium quantity. There is only one price that will bring the quantity supplied into line with the quantity demanded, and that's the equilibrium price. At that price, the market has cleared. So let's take a look at some prices that might be something other than an equilibrium price. Let's imagine that we have a price that's high. I'm going to call it P surplus. You'll see in a moment why I'm calling it P surplus. How do consumers and producers react to a price that's higher than the equilibrium price? By the way, what I mean by a high price is I'm not saying that you look at the price and you say it's, oh my God, that's high. I'm saying it's high relative to the equilibrium price. So P surplus is further up the price axis than P equilibrium. All right, so how are consumers going to react when they see this price in the market? What we're going to do is we're going to start off with consumers first. We're going to move down the demand curve from left to right. Consumers are going to keep moving down the demand curve until they encounter the price. What we're saying is P surplus is the price in the market. So once we get to P surplus, what can we do? We can drop a line down here to the quantity axis, and this is the quantity that consumers are going to buy at that price. All right, what about producers? How do producers feel about a price like P surplus? Well, they really like that. So imagine that we start off over here on the supply curve. We're moving up the supply curve from left to right. We're going to keep on going until we encounter the price in the market, which we're saying is P surplus. So we're going to blow right through P equilibrium. We're going to keep on going until we get to P surplus, and then we drop a line down to the quantity axis, and this is the amount that producers are willing to supply at that price. Okay, what's the problem? The problem is that the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Anytime we have quantity supplied greater than quantity demanded, we have a surplus. So the story that I'm going to tell you is that the market is going to take care of that surplus all by itself. How's that going to happen? Well, you've got some producers who've produced this product, but there's nobody really buying it at that price. So instead of waiting around for somebody to come in and hopefully buy it at that price, maybe they'll offer some discounts, they'll put it on sale. When consumers see that the price is a little bit lower, then they'll come into the market. We still have a surplus, but at a lower price, this surplus is becoming smaller. And then as more producers see that the price is still too high, they'll offer to lower their prices, and that'll attract more consumers into the market. We still have a surplus, but eventually we'll get down to the equilibrium price. And when we do, the market will have cleared. There will no longer be a surplus. All right, let's talk a little bit about shortage for a moment. When will a shortage occur? A shortage will occur when the price is too low. Now, what do I mean by a low price? Do I mean that you look at that price and you say, oh, that's cheap? No. What I mean is it's a low price relative to the equilibrium price. In other words, in this market, there's some price we call P equilibrium that will bring quantity supplied and quantity demanded into line with each other so that there's no surplus or no shortage. For whatever reason, what we're seeing right now is that the price in the market is actually below P equilibrium. So how are consumers and producers going to react to a price of piece shortage. So again, we'll start off with consumers. Consumers move from left to right down the demand curve. So we'll start off over here at the very, very top. We'll keep on moving down the demand curve, keep going down. Forget about the equilibrium price. The price in the market is piece shortage. So once we get to piece shortage, what are we going to do? We're going to take a line, we're going to drop it down to the quantity axis, and this is the quantity that consumers are going to demand at a price of piece shortage. Okay, what about producers? So for producers, we're going to start along the supply curve, again going from left to right. We're going to keep going until we get to the price of here at piece shortage. Producers are not too happy. You know, if consumers are pretty happy because the prices is low, producers not so much. So once we get to piece shortage over here, we drop a line down to the quantity axis. What do we see? This is the quantity that producers are willing to supply. This is the quantity that consumers demand. The quantity that consumers demand is greater than the quantity that producers are willing to supply. So we have a shortage in the market. So if prices are free to adjust, and this is very important, we expect that the market will take care of this shortage all by itself. So how would it do that? Imagine that you are a consumer and you want this product and you want it at a price of piece shortage, but you're not getting it. Maybe what you'd offer to do is pay a little bit more. If you offer to pay a little bit more, that'll bring some producers into the market. Are we still going to have a shortage? Yeah, the price is going up. We're still going to have a shortage, but guess what? That shortage is going to be less than the shortage was at piece shortage. Okay, let's say that some consumers offer to pay more. If the price is going up, some consumers may be offering to pay more, but some consumers may be leaving the market altogether because they're saying to themselves, "Well, I didn't get it at piece shortage, and now that the price is going up, I really don't want it at that price." But a higher price will attract more producers into the market. We still might have a shortage if the price is over here, but the shortage is getting smaller. And finally, when we get to the equilibrium price, the market will have cleared. Now, some students say, well, how come markets don't always clear? And my response to this is economists are not saying that the market will always clear. Economists are saying that the market will eventually clear. So how long will it take for the market to clear? And the answer to that question, like a lot of questions in economics, is it depends. It depends on what type of market it is. If we're talking about the stock market, where you've got many buyers and many sellers making many trades throughout the trading day, every time a trade is made, buyer and seller are getting together. It's setting the price for that point in time. It might be a fraction of a second, but it's setting the price at that point in time, and that's the market price. The market is cleared. If, on the other hand, you're talking about the real estate market, that's a different story. Homes can take a long time to sell when there's a surplus in the market, when the price is too high, because a lot of people who are selling homes don't want to accept a lower price, they're not willing to, and it might take them a while to realize that the price has come down. Or if we have a shortage in the housing market, it might take a long time for home builders to be able to get the permits and start construction and start the building to increase the supply of homes, especially in California. So we might have a shortage in that market for a while. Does that make sense? So all we're saying here when we talk about equilibrium is that in a market where prices are free to change, we don't expect that a surplus or shortage will last for a long time, but long is a relative term. Some markets may be out of equilibrium for longer than others, but eventually we expect the market to come back into equilibrium. All right, I'm going to end it here because we're going to get into some other things after we talk about equilibrium. Actually, I got to figure out how we're going to talk about that.